United with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors, serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation of Life Christian Broadcasting Television. And now, United with Christ.
Welcome to United with Christ. I'm Wally Chapman, your host today, and I'm very fortunate to have a young pastor here in town. He started a new church, and his name's Ben Cruz. Ben, we're really glad that you're here. What's the name of your church, and what are you doing?
Thanks, Wally. I appreciate the opportunity. The church name is Surrendered Ministries, and we're in the lower valley of El Paso, off of North Loop. It's 8617 North Loop Drive, and God brought me back to my zip code. I grew up here in El Paso and graduated from Del Valle High School, so I'm back in my zip code.
Wow, wow. Now that's surrendered past tense.
Past tense, yes.
So why did you pick that name?
Well, it actually started when I was in San Antonio. I had left El Paso and was in San Antonio for about 13 years. And during that time, I had actually started a small business doing video and photography, and came up with the name Surrendered Media at the time, and just wanted my business and everything I did to be surrendered to God, and wanted to help nonprofits and make sure that it was devoted to that. And so when we started the church, we were looking for names, and everything that we talked about as far as what we wanted the ministry to really be focused on kept going back to that name, or that word of being surrendered. And so we went with Surrendered Ministries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has that been hard? To be surrendered?
Oh, absolutely. So being surrendered is not an easy thing, not an easy aim, but that's the aim of our church, is to be surrendered to Christ, to His will, as individuals, but also as a church, and also to be in the community to help others be surrendered to Him as well. We believe that that's what God has called us to do, to be surrendered to Him. And that's a difficult thing to do, especially growing up and being in a culture, and it's just human nature that we're so focused on what we want to do, what we have control over, but to give that up and to say, okay, Lord, it's all yours. You take the lead, and I'll follow. Okay.
Now, you were in El Paso before, and I understand you used to be at the station building before.
Yes, yeah, it was interesting walking into this building. I was just sharing a post on Facebook with our church family, just how amazing God works. I started my career here as a photojournalist when this station used to be News Channel 4, and they've since moved to different locations. So being back at this building, I was telling someone here that I started here working behind the camera to bring El Paso its news, and now to have this opportunity to be able to talk about the gospel and talk about God in front of the camera and bring this to El Paso is quite an honor.
That's good. So when people come to your church and they see Surrendered Ministry, they come and realize that this is going to be a in-depth, personal kind of relationship with God that they're going to develop there. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's what we hope, that when people walk into our church, that it starts with relationship. That when they're greeted with a friendly smile and an encouraging word, knowing that we're here to help you, and we're here to make this our aim together, to be surrendered to God. It's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do. It sounds nice. It's a great idea. We sing hymns, I surrender all, and it sounds great, and it moves us. But to really walk it out, to really live it out, is a difficult thing, especially in the chaos that we're surrounded in.
Sure, and it's getting worse, it seems, all the time.
Absolutely.
Now, you came in a very good time to start a church, didn't you?
Yes, prime time, great timing for everything. All we know, I was telling someone lately, all we know is pandemic church is what I call it, because we started our church in December of 2019, right before the pandemic hit. And so the rest, as you know, is history, and we're still dealing with it today in some forms, and that's all we know. Although I grew up in the church, so I had an idea of what church looked like. We, was part of a church in San Antonio, but leading a church or beginning a church ministry in the pandemic was an interesting interesting task.
Yeah, our minister at Park Hills came right at the beginning of the pandemic too, about 6 months before, and it's been totally changing for him. So what did you do to build it while no one's going anywhere?
Well, we quickly realized what being surrendered meant. We knew that we weren't going to be the ones that built it, and we couldn't. And we had a great opportunity to really see God at work. And I love telling people that when things were shutting down during the pandemic, God was still building his kingdom. And he was using his people to do that. So when we first came to El Paso with this call to ministry, we wanted to start small groups and do more gatherings, and we were beginning to do that. And when the pandemic hit, everything changed. Everyone separated or stayed home. No one was going to other people's houses anymore. No one was going to church. Everything went virtual. So we were able to do that, but we had to really rethink on what church looked like. So it meant doing Zoom meetings, doing Bible studies like that. But it also gave us the opportunity to be the church out in the community, and we started a food distribution on our own at first, and then we were able to partner with the El Paso Baptist Association to take even more food out to the different churches. Regardless of denomination, it was just trying to get food into the hands of people and families that needed it. And God was using his church to do that.
And the people were willing to come to the church to get the food.
It was amazing to see God's people come together despite their differences in maybe doctrine or theology. We had Catholic churches coming, Protestant churches, Methodist, Baptist, Pentecostal. It didn't matter the denomination, but we saw God's kingdom at work to help people that were in need.
Okay, now you used the word that's interesting, is kingdom.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
It's something that I learned in the church that I trained in. Really, I call it was my training ground for sure. I learned so much from the church community that I came from in San Antonio. It was called Community Bible Church. And they were the ones who helped us really get established at first, and along with the El Paso Baptist Association and the BGCT. And their vision is for the kingdom, not one particular church. It's about God's kingdom. And that is something that I think it's difficult for a lot of us to operate in at first, because there tends to be sometimes a competitiveness of we have to protect our church and our people, and that's where it can quickly go astray, right? We have to realize that this is God's kingdom, his church, his people. And in some ways, I believe, even in the pandemic, we were able to kind of refocus that a little bit. And we wanted to really push that idea about us being part of a kingdom, that every church is just a castle in the kingdom, right? And we all have our resources, our talents, and our ways of reaching people. But together we can build his kingdom through the grace of God, that he gives us the ability to do that.
Yep. I remember back in the 80s, it was every church for themselves.
Right.
And one of the phrases I heard from others is that we got someone from another church, we're having evangelism. And I'm thinking, that's not what it's about. It's others. And I went through and counted all the churches that were in the yellow pages that were Christian, that had Jesus as Savior, counting the Catholics and all the Protestants. Right. And there were less than 400. And the city was about 700,000 at that stage. So I thought, gee, we could all have 1,000 on Sunday and still have half the city to reach. What's going on here when we're calling it sheep stealing or whatever? Let's build his kingdom. Right. And you start doing that, then everybody rises in reaching people, and God starts blessing everyone who gets involved in the kingdom, doesn't he?
Right. We can certainly try to build our own kingdoms, but it won't go very far.
Yeah.
If we're really trying to minister to this city and take the gospel to the people who need to hear it, we need to really link arms and work together, despite whatever differences we may have. But know that it's God who's building his kingdom, and he's going to use his people to do that. And it's going to take being surrendered to his will and not our own will. And that's where I think sometimes we kind of get that mixed up. And it's hard it's easy to fall into that. But to keep that in focus, that this is not my church. And I try to tell people, like, please correct me if it ever comes into the dialogue, but I try to be very careful of, Surrender Ministries isn't my church, and it's his church, his people, and he's going to do with it what he sees is the best course of action for where he wants to do in that community.
Yeah, and it's amazing, over the years, I'd be at pastors' meetings and that, and these guys would say, well, my church does this and my church does that. And I kept, no, it's not yours. Jesus is the one who's in charge. There's a different name on the outside.
Right.
But when it's my church, I don't help anybody who's not going to come here. I remember talking to a couple of people who were in the military that had come to town, and they were looking for a church. And I said, I don't know if our brand is what you want, but tell me where you're from, and maybe I can refer you to a church that was where you came from and where you fit in best, instead of in 3 years trying to find one, and then we'd have someone show up 6 months before they're being transferred, and they say, oh, I wish we'd have found this before. I said, me too, but sometimes we want to grab, and we want the money, and we want everything, and not realize that he sends the right people.
Right. I mean, we all look different. We all sound different. We do church in different ways. We're going to minister and reach different people, and that's the whole point. Yeah. We're not going after one particular type of person. The whole world needs to know the gospel. The whole world needs to know who Jesus is. And if it's someone that I can't reach, then God would use somebody else to draw that person near. So we want to advocate that. We want to work with other ministries, other churches, say, how can we work together to serve our community, to serve this city, so that they'll know who Jesus is and they'll be able to experience his love, his grace, and the hope that we have in him.
Yeah.
It's a bigger picture.
Frustrated when I was starting in ministry here, and we'd go knocking on all these doors around the church, and no one ever came, and no one ever came. And then one day in our prayer meeting, we said, Lord, you know who will fit in here. Would you send the ones that will fit here, either that we can help or can help us, and open up their eyes so they'll come? And you know what? People started coming. That prayer was answered. And it was a whole lot better than being frustrated, walking and knocking, and no one wanted to do it. And some of the people in this town, you'd knock at their door, and they'd say church, so they'd run and get some money to give you. And it was really a really wrong thing, what we wanted.
But I mean, I think that's evident of how it works for all of us, even in our personal lives. We see something's not working, and then we decide, oh, we just need to go to the Lord in prayer and really get some guidance. And typically that's what happens. We start doing things in our own effort, in our own power, and then we start to see how that doesn't work out the way it should. And then we go back to God and we're like, okay, what are we doing wrong? Lord, help us, send the people, or help me, with this situation. And that's what he wanted us to do all along. Yeah. And we see his provision afterward.
Yeah. And faith is one of those things that you activate because it's only you who can do it.
Right.
You can hear of other people, but you've got to do the faith, don't you? And that's where surrender comes in.
Absolutely. That was what was hard when we felt like God was calling us to come back to El Paso and begin ministry here. We had to leave a church family that we love dearly. Those were my brothers and my sisters. I tell the guys that I used to work with, I was on their communications team at the church that we were at Community Bible Church. And these guys were my brothers. I grew up an only child, and these guys were the ones that I lived life with for many years, and got to really know them. And this was our community, this was our family. And so when God was calling us away from that to go into the unknown of what was going to happen, we had to make that choice of do we really believe, and do we have the faith that we sing about, that we talk about all the time? And God always puts us in situations where we have to choose to follow him, despite how hard it is, despite how scary it can be.
Yeah.
But that's faith. If you knew what was going to happen, it wouldn't be faith. Right. So I had a dear brother of mine tell me, a good friend, and he was explaining just that. And I was praying about the timing of it all, and he was saying, well, is this faith or not? And not only that, but my wife and my two daughters were also going to be part of this journey. They're also learning about what faith looks like. And so we come across all these decisions and these points in our life. We have to make that choice of, am I going to do what I feel is comfortable, what I feel I'm good with, what I want to do? Or am I going to follow Jesus and where he's sending me to go, whatever that may look like? And it's different for everybody.
Sure.
So that's where I think the surrendered thing came into play. And one of my life verses, we all have many, is Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will set your path straight.
Yeah.
And I've had to reach and cling to that for so many, instances in my life where I just didn't understand what God was doing, and had to just make the decision and the choice to say, I'm gonna trust you. I might not see what you're doing or understand it, but I trust your character, and I trust your promises, and I trust your will, even though I don't get it right now, and I'm just going to take that step of faith. And that's the scariest thing to do. I mean, we left our church family, sold our house. I didn't have a job lined up here. I had my small business that I brought with me, and God has sustained us, and we've been able to see his hand at work in the ministry that he's led us to lead and to be a part of. And that has been amazing. Things that I would have missed out on, that my wife and my 2 daughters would have missed out on, experiencing that if we would have stayed with what we felt was comfortable and what we felt we were happy.
Yeah, yeah. How true. And the journey is sometimes not easy, and sometimes a bit stressful. And I can remember at one stage when I was pastor beginning here in town, and I took a cut and pay working 3/4 time at Kmart to be full-time pastor. And then Faye came from Australia, and we got married, and she didn't have a job, and we had to find a place to live and do all of these things. And I was just wondering, how are we going to make it?
Yeah.
And for the first 7 or 8, 10 years, we could have gotten food stamps, but we said, no, God's going to take care of us. We'll walk with him. We're not going to sit and wait. And he always did. And I can remember a discussion that Faye and I had, and I said, would you go get, she was at that stage writing the bills, and then I ended up doing it. And she said, would you pay the bills so I know how much money I have to buy groceries? And I'd say, go get groceries, and then I'll pay the bills. But we had to do it the other way, because we'd made a commitment that in El Paso, we were going to make all our bills. I wasn't going to be a pastor and have a bad credit rating around town. So we ate a lot of ramen noodles and other things, but God was there.
Yeah.
And he always took care.
And the way that he provides is just, you don't get to experience those things like when God provides in ways that only he can. He can orchestrate things in the only way that he can. It's amazing to see him do that. But to experience that, though, you have to get outside of yourself and what you're trying to do and take control. It's like God saying, you want to control it, go ahead, right? And see how far you get. But if you want to take your hands off the wheel and just let me take over, it's not going to be an easy ride. It's not always going to be a fun ride. But in the end, you have that peace, you have that joy, knowing that he's going to supply what you need to carry out the will and the purpose that he has on your life. And we've been blessed to be able to experience that. And it hasn't always been easy, and certainly not through a pandemic. And we've had those challenges like any other church and ministry that has gone through that as well. But all we know is pandemic church. And so to compare it to anything else, it's hard to say right now, but we know that God is leading, and he's still working, and he's moving. And to be a part of that is just a humbling experience to just have the honor of being part of it.
Yeah. Those of you who are watching, if you're looking for a place to experience some struggles and some really see God working, check out Surrendered Ministries. It's on North Loop near Lee Trevino, isn't it?
Lomaland.
Lomaland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
actually, and it actually used to be where North Loop Baptist Church used to be. It's been a building that's been in the community for decades. So it's recognizable, but it's easy to swing past it. It's on a busy street, but we're there, and we have, it's a small church still. We're still in building phase. but a lot of great things are happening, and being able to see God at work there.
Well, sometimes you see God working in a smaller group because you have to, and you don't get lost in the crowds. You start seeing a real relationship to God develop when it's small.
That's been the beauty of it, is the relationships that have been built there. These are the people that you call at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning when you're going in, you're facing a life crisis. And that's the hope. That's what the church is there for. The church is not there to come in and just be an audience member or to just sit back and watch, but to actually engage and take part in being the church. And I like to tell people that don't know whether or not, I don't know if I feel like going to church or why it's important. I don't feel like I need the church. And I was like, well, maybe you don't feel like you need the church now, but the church needs you. There's somebody sitting there that needs an encouraging word, somebody that's sitting there needs to hear from you, to hear what your wisdom might be able to impart on their life. That's why we all need each other. That's why God created, I believe, this thing we call church. It's not the four walls, the place where we get together, but if the pandemic showed us anything, is that the church is always on the move, and it's in His people, and it's us, how we engage with one another and how we build those relationships so we can encourage each other in those difficult times.
Right, and sometimes we sit in church and we do nothing, and we think, gee, everybody here's got their act together but me, and so everybody's sitting around or saying the same thing, and you could be sitting next to someone and you have the answer. I remember one of the guys, I mentioned something about pornography in a sermon, and the guy next to, I knew had a problem, but he wouldn't say anything to anybody. But once I mentioned it, then he came and talked to me. And, I had the answer, but he didn't, but he wasn't going to embarrass himself and let anybody know he had a real problem. Yeah. And that sits there in church all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah. People will quickly realize that church isn't what they really think it is sometimes. You're going to find out that there's people there just like you, and people that need Jesus just like you, and people that need hope and joy and strength and encouragement and all these things that we grasp at other things to try to find it in, but they need it just like you do. And so we're all the same there. And we had a saying in the church that I was at in San Antonio where it says that it's okay not to be okay, but God loves you too much to keep you that way. And He places you in a church, in a group of people that are struggling and going through a lot of the same things that you are. And being together is how God allows us to feel that tangible love. It's difficult for a lot of people to trust and have faith in a God they can't see or audibly hear at times. But He's placed His church in position so that we can have a tangible way to experience His love and His grace. And He calls on His people, on His church, to be that extension, for the community to feel His love, to feel His grace, to experience it, and draw closer to Him.
You're just not going to church and doing church.
No.
You're involved in folks' lives. We just got a couple more minutes. Is there anything special you'd like to share with the audience that's watching?
I think out of our story and why we talked about being surrendered to Jesus and why that's so important. Surrendered sometimes seems like a scary thing. It's not something that you hear of being a good thing. We talked about earlier where if you're surrendering, it's like you're giving up, but you're not giving up. You're giving into God's lead and His wisdom and His power for your life. Jesus said that if you want to be His disciples, that you need to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Him, right? And so it requires a sacrifice, and being able to say, Lord, I am following you. I know it's not going to be difficult, but I know and I trust your will is good for me too, and that you're going to be there for me through all of it. And so if you're sitting at home and you don't have a church that you're plugged into, it doesn't have to be Surrender Ministries, but find a church that is a Bible teaching church and get involved with the community, and you can just see how God will grow your faith and help you, and you'll know and be able to feel that you're not alone in whatever struggles or chaos that you might find yourself in.
Yeah. I remember there was a saying, or a phrase that went on, I'm okay, you're okay. And someone said that Jesus, the rich young ruler, came up to Jesus and said, hey, I'm okay and you're okay. And Jesus said, no, only one of us is okay. And I want to make you okay.
There you go.
That's right. That's what we're talking about in the church, is that we find victory. And instead of always doing the same old sin, caught in the same old trap, here's a chance to be set free and to live a life of freedom, isn't it?
Amen. That's right.
So I want to thank you for coming, Ben. Ben Cruz, Surrendered Ministries. The address is?
8617 North Loop.
Okay. And if you're looking for a place where you can be brought in, be loved, be part of a group that's all growing and walking with Jesus and moving that journey, this may be the place for you. Okay. And if it's not, if that's too far away, then go to somewhere nearby.
That's right.
A Bible-believing church that really teaches about Jesus, and man, you will be surprised what God can do. I've just finished a book on Martin Luther, on his life. And in it, he was trying every day to try to get to know God, and always coming to his mentor and confessing every day for all his bad thoughts, all that he did, everything else. And then one day he didn't have any of those. And he went and he confessed to God that he didn't have anything that was wrong, so I must have missed something. And it was all this fear. And then he got into a journey and finding that God had forgiven him and that he had a whole new life. And that was just so remarkable. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for
Thank you for being here, and we'll be praying for your ministry and what God's doing. And remember, wherever we are, we need to surrender and give our lives to the Lord, and then step out in faith and follow him, whether we're afraid or not. Thanks for being with us, and just have a blessed day. God bless you.